what to focus on at university to maximise your chances of getting into F1 with our very special panel from McLaren Racing. I'm Rachel from Formula Careers, and we started this project to help students figure out their study path into F1. I'm myself in my second year of university studying aeronautical engineering, so I'm in the same position as many of you. It's my absolute pleasure to host this webinar and hopefully share some insight and inspiration to anyone wanting to work in the industry. We are delighted to be joined by so many people, and we want you guys to send in lots of questions. So if you think of any, type them in the Q&A box and we will get to as many as we can. Just to let you know that this webinar will be recorded for playback at a later date. So let's introduce our panelists. We've had a slight change of plans with Ollie replacing Amelia, who is unable to attend today. So Thomas, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Thomas Koflek. I'm a mechanical design engineer for McLaren Racing. I work within the racing technology division, so working on things like aero rakes and camera mounts for the car, devices for the wind tunnel, and all things like that. Shall I hand over now to someone else? Ollie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm stepping in for Amelia, who's unfortunately not able to make it today. She's quite sorry about that. I am a race strategist, and I have been doing that for a year after doing 2 years on the graduate program at McLaren. So hopefully be able to answer any questions about the grad scheme and operational roles at McLaren. Cheers. I don't know if you want to, Borja, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hello everyone. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite, and thank you all for joining. I am Borja. I work as an aerodynamicist for McLaren Racing. Today, I'm making 3 years in McLaren, and my main responsibilities lay into the conceptual design and development of the F1 car rear wings and some aerodynamic devices around the rear. I've also worked in projects in the rear corner area around the wheels and for example the T-wing that we have on the Formula 1 race car. And in addition to that, I am also responsible for running wind tunnel shifts, which is a testing environment that we use to understand the race car from the aerodynamic point of view. So hello everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you guys so much for giving up your time today to join us. So let's get started. I have some kind of pre-prepared questions that we received from our Formula Careers support group on LinkedIn. And then after we've been through them, we will go through the questions in the chat box. So our first question is, what extracurricular activities should you get involved with in university? Borja.
Hi. So yeah, extracurricular activities, apart from the normal coursework that one can do in university, are super important because it's a way to make your CV stand out towards applications. Getting a job in Formula 1 is difficult, but not impossible at all. And are these extra things that you can add to your CV that can really boost your CV. Want to give an advice, the key here is patience, to show the big passion to work in the field and making it to your dream career. To start with, one of the most usual extracurricular activities that will help a lot getting a good understanding is doing Formula Student. If you have the opportunity in your university, that's a great way to understand how a race car works, teamwork, and working towards strict deadlines, which is the Formula 1 environment on itself. There are other things, for example, undertaking student projects, personal projects like blogs on the field that you want to specialize, that can help a lot, build understanding. Internships and summer jobs are a great way to show your passion to go the extra mile and get some extra learning. Networking also, it's an important thing in this. For motorsport, it's a small world, and it's really, really important to get to know people, ask for their opinions, how they have gotten to where they are, to understand better what's the best path. It's important. Volunteering in teams, in motorsports events is really a good idea. Going to career fairs. Even something that has become more and more important lately is esports, the professionalization of esports. I know a lot of people that are getting like really deep into it, into the engineering, in understanding how to set up a car and things like that. That's also super, super good knowledge that one can do while they are in university. And yeah, maybe another thing is to get to really master computer programs like MATLAB, CATIA for the design point of view, Python, also important. Excel is super important too. And yeah, basically to show the willingness to learn new programs is also important because some of the programs that we use in Formula One teams are bespoke. So getting to catch up quick on that is also a good trait. I think that those are different points which are really, really interesting for you to look at while at university.
Brilliant, thank you. Our next question is, how would you go about getting an internship or getting on the grad scheme for Thomas?
Good morning, everyone. It's going to be quite hard, but I'm going to overlap a fair bit with the answer you've just had. But I think the number one most important thing you can do to try and get on a grad scheme or an internship is have a USP, have something that sets your CV aside from everyone else's. If you imagine how many people are in even just the university you're currently studying that are going to be predicted first-class degrees, to then multiply that by all the universities in the country, that's hundreds and hundreds of people potentially applying for a couple of roles on a grad scheme. And what we need from the McLaren point of view is something that sets you apart from everyone else. What makes you special? And a lot of it relays back to what Borja's literally just gone over, is, show your willingness to learn, your determination. It doesn't necessarily have to be working on cars necessarily. Any kind of discipline where you've shown that you've applied yourself and succeeded at something, I think is a really, really credible and great thing to have in your CV. For instance, if you run a marathon or anything where you've got to put in a lot of effort over an extended period of time, that all helps to make you stand out. And I wouldn't necessarily worry. A lot of people go through the former student route, and that's a fantastic route, and I would highly implore you to follow that route. However, if your university doesn't offer that, that's not to say you won't get looked at if you've got something else that can make you stand out. Although it may not be a direct relation to Formula One in the same way that Formula Student is, it's all good learning. It shows who you are as a person, and ultimately, no one walks into a job in Formula One knowing exactly what they need to do and how they're going to do it. There is a certain element of, we're constantly pushing forwards and driving forwards, and it's your ability to learn and stay focused on a task, develop your skills personally. That's what will make you stand out, and that's what a Formula One team is looking for. So I think that, for me, would be the biggest one I can push you, is essentially just consider your USP, and then when you write your CV, make it apparent what your USP is and how you're setting yourself apart from everyone else.
Brilliant, thank you. Our next question is, how do internships / the graduate scheme work at McLaren? That one's for Ollie.
Yeah, so as someone who's fortunate enough to get onto the summer placement program in 2016, I believe, and then onto the graduate scheme in 2017, has experienced kind of both sides of it. So we generally, in the past, we've run 3 different programs. We've had a summer placement program, a year placement, and then a 2-year graduate scheme. And they generally work as they're kind of, as it says on the tin. So for the graduate scheme, which I'm going to talk about now, is a 2-year rotational program. So you will spend 2 years, depending on which graduate scheme you choose. There are 2. There's an operational and engineering graduate scheme. So Operational is more about running the business and making sure that parts are where they need to be at the right time and in the right place. And so you'll do placements in purchasing, planning, logistics, inspection, quality, basically making sure that the harebrained schemes that aerodynamicists and designers come up with end up on the car in the right time frame. So very much like making sure the business is running as it should. In terms of the engineering grad scheme, which is what I did, you spend your time in the engineering department, which covers the main areas such as design and aerodynamics, but also vehicle performance, vehicle dynamics, race engineering and strategy. So generally you'll spend the majority of your time in design and aerodynamics because they're the departments that have the most throughput in terms of drawings, designs and things that need working on. And so actually quite quickly you have a tangible effect on the performance of the car because you're actually responsible for parts that are going on the car, or you're responsible for aerodynamic upgrades. So you might not be, well, you won't be designing the next front wing upgrade, but you will be designing components that will form part of an upgrade package that may be put on the car mid-season, which is quite a nice feeling. But as well as those two big areas, like it's a really good scheme for finding out areas you may not necessarily have experience in. So my background is in design engineering at university and through previous experience, but actually I took more of an interest in the operational side of the engineering side of the business. So race engineering, strategy, vehicle performance, trying to understand how we can maximize the car package that we have at track. So my role in race strategy is very much away from a design engineer, but that's all through having the rotational experience on the graduate scheme where I got a chance to learn what it is that I wanted to do with my career, rather than just kind of going down the path that I had been down for a number of years of design engineering. So it's quite good for that, but it's a unique experience that McLaren offers on their graduate scheme, which I don't think many other teams offer. And the graduate scheme is open for application now, I believe. I'm not sure exactly when it closes, but it is still open, so get your applications in.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question for you here. How can you progress to working trackside at McLaren?
Yes, so it's often a question I get asked, being in the race strategy group, and I have been trackside, but the issue that many people don't see with F1 is that the operational passes that are allowed at track, so you're only allowed a certain number of people at track at any one time, and that's quite limited. So therefore there's kind of a premium on how many people you can take to the track. Often they're given to more experienced engineers or strategists or operational people. So really it's not a question of asking yourself, how can I get trackside? I often think of it as, how can I become an operational member of the team? So the team generally is split into three areas: production, engineering, and operational. So operational is kind of, as I mentioned earlier, maximizing the car that we have at the track, but that's done from the factory as well. So we have quite an extensive team of people that work race weekends in mission control, many of which are volunteers. I know Borja's spent time with us in the race strategy group volunteering, which has been massively useful. It's kind of thinking about what you want to do in terms of having the right skills to be an operational member of the team, and eventually you may find yourself trackside. Some people start out in F1 desperate to become the next race engineer or desperate to become the next race strategist, but actually over time they realize that lifestyle might not necessarily be for them. So it's really a case of, if you think you want to be an operational member of the team, that's great, go for it and maximize your skills such that you can do that. You know, multitasking, working in a high pressure environment, making the right decisions in a short space of time with limited information. Really kind of focus on the sort of bread and butter skills of being a good operational engineer, because I think it's a very different skill set to a design engineer or an aerodynamic engineer, which requires lots of detailed analysis over a period of days or weeks potentially to come up with as close to a perfect solution as possible. Whereas I think operationally, it's very much about making the least bad decision in a very limited amount of time with limited information. So they're quite different skill sets, but I would say don't set your heart on being trackside too soon. Think about if you want to be an operational engineer, and then trackside will come at some point if you find it to be the right thing for you and if you have the right propensity for that role.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, we're now going to get onto the questions in the chat. So our first question I have for Borja, this is, any advice on how to become an aerodynamicist?
Yeah, so to give a bit of background, I am an aerodynamicist and I'm a graduate in aerospace engineering, and I have a master's of motorsport from Cranfield University. So I want to emphasize that there are different ways to land a job in Formula One and even as an aerodynamicist. However, there are some common skills which would definitely help into getting into an interview and being successful on it. I think first of all is you can study aerospace engineering or another degree, but what is important is that you can develop very good skills in aerodynamics, understand well flow physics, low speed flow physics. So that would be the first point to make sure that you have enough knowledge of it from your degree. You can even boost it by participating in or developing projects in aerodynamics in university, via your thesis, via group work, via Formula student, as I mentioned before. Another important point to develop knowledge is, which could be really helpful, is on the design point of view. We as aerodynamicists spend most of our time developing geometries with surfacers in CAD programs, in our case CATIA, but NX is another good software. Any of these, SolidWorks also is a good way to start getting some knowledge on that, because that's gonna become your day-to-day work. You're gonna start a day, open your CATIA and start thinking and developing things there. So that is very important. It's something that maybe is not given enough focus on university. So it's something that you can really go for. And some other important things is to develop knowledge in CFD software, for example. Star CCM, Fluent are very, very good programs to get your head around, know how to create a mesh, what it takes to create sensible aerodynamic simulations. That's very important. And if in uni you have the chance to get some experience or some knowledge on physical testing, like maybe not a big wind tunnel, but something related to aerodynamic testing, all of these things can really help boost your application and eventually land a job in aerodynamics. That's mainly focused on aero, but something I also want to mention is that Formula One, it's a very multidisciplinary industry. So it's not gonna hurt at all if you also have knowledge in other areas of the car, like vehicle dynamics, structures, and everything. So that can also be an add-on to your application and can really help you get into an interview and potentially get the job.
Thank you. Our next question is for Thomas. So how did you get into mechanical design in F1?
So I didn't come in the traditional route through grad scheme or an apprenticeship with McLaren. So I started off by doing my A-levels and going to university to study motorsport engineering. So from the point of A-levels, I decided that I wanted to be a mechanical designer in Formula One. And I went to Oxford Brookes, who had a course specializing in motorsport. So I thought, perfect, that all lines up. Basically finished university and didn't get onto a grad scheme or an apprenticeship. But I did get offered a job working in historic motorsports. So I think it's important to remember that if you don't get the job straight out of university, that isn't the end of the world. You've still got your whole career ahead of you. There's so much time to develop your skills, your knowledge, and what you can bring to the table with a Formula One team. So for me, I absolutely loved the historic motorsport side, because you go motor racing effectively at the weekend, but it wasn't quite the high pressure of Formula One in the sense that there's massive R&D and like the corporate side of it with all that pressure. I was working in a smaller company, so there was a massive opportunity to learn and develop my knowledge. So I was there for 5 years, then essentially got to the point where there's only so much you can learn from the past, and wanted to learn more about engineering and design going forward. So joined a big automotive company. I was there for a year. Basically didn't love it so much because the pace of work is tremendously slow, in the sense that if you're working on a big automotive project, you can work on it for a year and it might be another 3 years before it's even been manufactured and is looking at production. So that kind of redoubled my efforts to get a job with McLaren. And I mean, that's the other thing to consider. You don't expect to just apply for a job and get it straight away. You've got to keep trying, keep applying, keep networking with people, getting to know people inside the team if you can. I'm very lucky. One of my friends got a job at McLaren before me, and then I kept pestering him. He let me know if there was any jobs coming up, and yeah, you just got to keep working at it. So in the end, I had 6 years experience on mechanical design, split 5 years of historic motorsport, and then a year of a modern day automotive manufacturer. And yeah, that was my mechanical design engineering background to F1 basically.
Thank you. Our next question is for Ollie. So how did you become a strategist?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did a mechanical engineering degree at Bath, which was 4 years of the placement year. The placement year I did at Williams as a composite design engineer, did a design engineering placement at McLaren for a summer, and then went on to the grad scheme. So all signs pointed to me being a composite design engineer once I'd finished my graduate scheme at McLaren. But after having done a few placements, one of which in strategy, as I mentioned earlier, I always thought I'd enjoy that side of the business, the kind of operational side, and, Sunday afternoon racing and get the adrenaline going more so than the design engineering side. But having the opportunity to learn about it on the grad scheme meant that I could actually realize that interest. So I spent 2 or 3 months, I can't remember, as part of the graduate scheme with the strategy group on a project with them, which was quite an interesting project that I'm not sure I can go into. But that was kind of my first foray into the strategic world. Before that, I knew as much as anybody that watches F1 on TV does. As well as that, I volunteered for every race weekend, either with the race strategy group or with the other groups that were offering like volunteering opportunities on the weekends, so race engineering and the simulator. And basically by being in that environment of listening to what was going on the race weekend and all the strategic decisions that we make, which aren't simply in the race. A lot of people think race strategy is what tyres do you fit in the race, and it does come down to that on a Sunday. But previously, when we still had tyre nominations where we could choose how many tyres to take to each race, the strategic thinking happens months in advance of a race. Often the numbers that we base our simulations and projections on change by the time we get to the race. So really, we're making a lot of decisions through the entire race weekend, if not before. So I really enjoyed that kind of making decisions and learning how to make decisions effectively. So as I was on the grad scheme, I spent a lot of time reading up on, decision making in different areas of, business. So lots of how to make the right decisions in financial markets, for example, and how to try and learn about your cognitive heuristics and understanding different types of thinking. So there's lots of books on Thinking Fast and Slow is a good book about how you have your initial reaction to something, and quite often a lot of people think a certain way, and then you have to rein yourself in and actually process the information rather than listening to your gut reaction. So I found it was a really good way to have a technical input to the company, add performance to the car, and attribute some championship points to what I was doing day to day, and also a nice way to kind of explore the kind of slightly more human side in a way. Like a lot of what we do is trying to get buy-in from people to do the things that we think are the right things. So often we'll suggest stopping because we think the tire, like extending a stint because we think the tires are fine, whereas the driver might be complaining that, you know, the tires are about to drop off the cliff, but actually his lap times are fine, so we're happy. So it's really quite a nice kind of step away from what I'd done traditionally, which was mechanical engineering, into something that is more just decision based, really. And actually, I as a student, I hated maths, but my job is pretty much all maths. So it's interesting how the application of what you learn can actually make it quite different. So in terms of how to become a race strategist, there is really no set path. Like a strong mathematical or engineering based degree will help, but actually we hire in the group, we have lots of people with different experience, with different kind of skills and strengths. So as a group race strategy, we'll hire anybody who, you know, can understand the problem and think about how to solve it in a original and individual way. I think generally we like people who are kind of self-starters, and that goes across the whole business as well. We like people who are driven to find the right answer. And I think one thing that's quite a good strength to have as a strategist specifically is self-review and not having personal buy-in to the decisions you make. So effectively, after every race, we look back at what we did and we basically criticize ourselves in order to make ourselves better. We're really quite self-critical, which I think drives us to be a good group, and I think is a skill set that a lot of people would benefit from, but is often quite difficult to look at something you did and say, you know what, that was actually not very good and we need to improve that. So I think having some maths aptitude and interest in decision making is kind of the key thing to being a strategist.
Thank you. The next question, I'm actually quite interested in the response. So do you have any tips on getting the most out of a placement year / internship? And that one's for everyone or anyone who can answer.
I'm happy to pick it up. Yeah, I'll go for it.
Sorry, go for it.
So I did an industrial placement year. I didn't do one within Formula One. However, I would say the biggest thing for me in my industrial placement year, which did lead to a job at the end of it, which I discussed earlier in historic motorsport, is be keen, ask lots of questions. If you don't understand something, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is to just nod along and not want to appear silly, effectively, for not asking questions. But the reality is a lot of discussions that are going on, particularly if you're a placement student, will probably be about things that you don't fully understand yet. And the best thing you can do is ask questions and try and understand. And don't just ask them for the sake of it, ask them because you're genuinely interested and you want to understand. I think that's probably one of the most frustrating things in the position I'm in now, is if someone doesn't understand, they'll ask you why, and then they don't listen to the answer. You know, genuinely want that answer. Try and understand, learn as much as you can when you're on placement year, because effectively it's a good deal for you because you're being paid to learn effectively, assuming that you're on a placement year that pays. I know they not necessarily all of them do, but it's a fantastic way to learn and be surrounded by you know, professionals who, if you come straight out of university, you may struggle to have the time with them. A lot of companies are a lot more lenient with placement students in terms of how much time and knowledge they're prepared to spend giving to you. So make the most of that. You know, it comes back to what Ollie was saying about volunteering to help out with weekend work at McLaren, or, you know, in the race strategy group. Even if you're on a placement where they don't have a race strategy group at the weekend or whatever, just try and throw yourself into every opportunity you're given and learn as much as you can. And I would say as well, if you get to the end of your placement year and you like your job but don't love it, and you think, well, when I finish uni, I'll go for this amazing job and hopefully that will work out, so it doesn't matter if I leave on bad terms with this company. I would say never, ever, ever burn bridges. Always, you know, try and leave your placement year or whatever on good terms. I would say as well, if you're going to final year, for me, I approached my boss at the time during my placement year asking for a job when I finished university. Ultimately, I wanted a job in Formula One, but that was a job that I enjoyed. I knew I was learning a lot from it, and I knew that long term it was a great way to kind of add to my knowledge and create my USP for getting into Formula One. So I could then focus during final year on my grades and getting the results I needed. And it's a great way of taking that pressure off yourself. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for placement year, and I'd highly recommend, if anyone's on the fence about whether to do one, I'd highly recommend you do.
I would like to add something linked to what I was mentioning in the first question, that as Thomas is saying, it's a fantastic opportunity for networking. Like, you are doing your studies, and then in between you have the opportunity to kind of sweep, study on different areas of the team, understand well what everything is about, because you might have an idea before coming into the team or into the industry about how things are, but it's very different when you are learning it. And then when you finish your placement, your industrial placement, you will have completely changed your mind. You know the people that work in the different things. You know how things are, what you would like more or less, and yeah. And I really want to emphasize what Tom is saying. Don't burn bridges, and use it as a great opportunity for when you finish your degree, when your studies, you have the doors open to start your career.
Yeah, I just want to add something on top of that. Both Tom and Borja's answers have been excellent. I agree with it completely. I think for me, the placement year was a really good opportunity to realise that what I was doing at university would have an effect, or like would have, like, it became real. Like at university, I was quite honestly like never the smartest person at university. I was never the strongest person. Nobody ever asked me for the answers to any questions on problem sheets. Like, I was pretty good at design and I was pretty good practically, but I felt quite honestly not well enough equipped to do a job in Formula One, and it was always a pipe dream. But I was lucky enough to get a placement in Formula One. But I'd say for whatever placement you get, like, I struggled after 2 years of university, and I thought maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not cut out to be an engineer. But actually having a placement and realizing that, you know, I am kind of good at this. I am, like, my skills are applicable to certain things, and actually it was something that made me have a lot more drive in my final 2 years. I was kind of cracking on with university in the first 2 years, you know, like, I'll see what I can do. Hopefully I'll get a 2-1. You know, I never had hope. Like, I always wanted a first, but I never really had the knowledge or the intelligence to get a first, if I'm honest. But then, like, after placement year, I thought, you know what, like, I can do this. It became a big motivator for me to go back to university, pick modules that I was interested in, and just absolutely kind of like smash it as hard as I could and try and get the best I could out of university. And as well as having like the best grades I could get, it was also part of like doing the things I was interested in. Previously at university, I was just kind of going along with what I thought I should be doing, like making sure I had a broad engineering knowledge, which is useful for any job. But also, like, when I went back to university, I was like, I want to work in motorsport. This is what I want to do. I'm going to go all out and learn things that are specific to motorsport. But if that doesn't work out, they're going to be useful for any job, like grit, determination, and just kind of like pushing yourself to do stuff, and kind of like trying to take any opportunity that's there, learn things that are new to you. Like, I had no experience of like car setup work, but I just was like, that was something I wanted to be interested in and get good at. So I just kind of pushed for it and did it and learnt about it, and came out the back of university with a lot of knowledge that I think many students don't have, because they just go along with the curriculum and do what they kind of think is what they need to do. But actually just do what you want to do, and just push like crazy and be good at what you want to be good at, is what I'd say. And use placement year as a motivator for the final 2 years of university.
Thank you all for that one. I have a question for Ollie. How did you prepare for the graduate recruitment process?
How did I woefully underprepared for the the first stage of the assessment. I didn't think that there would be, and I started the process just thinking it would be kind of like a normal process of CV and, you know, answer a few competency questions. And then there was some like different elements to the assessment process when I was doing it, and I was kind of taken by surprise. So when I found that I'd got through that first stage, I was kind of like, oh, I thought I'd messed that one up. I think the best thing you can do to prepare, and I was actually flicking through some of the questions, and somebody asked, is the assessment centre for the engineering graduate scheme based on like mechanical engineering? And there are elements of that, but I would say the assessment centre and like the process is geared towards like logical thinking and numeracy ability and like how you solve problems. So we've tried to take out as much of the, because I'm actually involved in some of the like helping with some of the recruitment of graduates. So what we've tried to do is try and remove any course specific knowledge. There will be some questions that do have an element of like, if you think, if this would happen, what do you think might happen next? But it really is kind of like practical knowledge and understanding and, you know, kind of common sense engineering, I'd say. So I think the best way to prepare is to try and make sure you have a good base theoretical understanding of engineering, if you can. Like some courses don't offer that. Like if you do a computer science course, you're not going to have, you know, you're not going to understand like beams and bending as much as somebody else. But just really make sure you know your stuff well at a base level, have good numeracy skills, and as well as that, like just kind of think things through and don't rush to put an answer down, or just kind of make sure you're comfortable with what you're saying and you've got a reason for what you're saying. Often at interview, at least, my memories of interviews are that most of the time I get the question wrong, but having like, same way in an exam, you show you're working. In an interview, people are looking for how you've got to the answer you've got to. It doesn't matter that the answer you've got to is necessarily not the right one. It's that you're applying the right kind of engineering or logical thought processes to solve the problem at hand. So it's really a case of just being confident, but understand that you need to have a reason for your answer, basically. But in terms of preparing for the assessment for the graduate scheme, I can't really give any specific advice other than just be honest, open, and yeah, just kind of brush up on stuff you've already learned.
Brilliant, thank you. My next question is for everyone or anyone who wants to answer. Are there any particular books, either technical or not, which you would recommend to complement practical experience?
Yeah, could probably start this one. So in aerodynamics, for example, some books that can give you very good knowledge. Basics, for example, are all the books from Anderson on aerodynamics are really, really good. They are studied in the degree, but it's really good to have a good understanding of all the low speed aerodynamics there. What happens with lift, drag, etc. And then if you want to go towards more the specifics, Race Car Aerodynamics is also a really, really good book. And I think that everyone who wants to understand aerodynamics better in a race car has read it before or after. It's a really good one. There are other good books in vehicle dynamics, for example. Milliken is a very, very famous book in the industry. It's a big book, but it's really good to understand what it goes with vehicle dynamics. And then basically something that one can do and is approachable is to read magazines, read blogs also. There are really, really good articles in motorsport.com, for example, that can start like making you think on the technicalities of a race car, for example. I think those are good examples, a good way to spend your time doing some reading. Papers also, really good. You know, if you are more suggestions from anyone else.
Oh, go on, Tom, you've unmuted first, you go.
Sure. It's the race to unmute. I would, from a mechanical point of view, there's one book that I use quite a lot for reference in the sense that it's got some good equations and explains things quite well, and that's Shigley's Mechanical Engineering Design. So for anyone looking at mechanical, I'd recommend that. And then from like a more general Formula One point of view, there are two books that I'd recommend. There's Adrian Newey's book, which the title of it escapes me, but I think it's like how to design a car or along those lines. But that's really interesting from anyone who wants to get a job in Formula One. Appreciation of basically he's done it. He's done everything you can pretty much do in Formula One, and he's risen to the top. And it gives you an idea of how he did it and the kind of level of work that was required for him to do that. And it's an interesting book. It gives you a lot of background into a job in Formula One. And likewise, Nick Fry has written a book about his year with Brawn GP. So he worked alongside Ross Brawn at the head of that team. And again, it won't help you with your engineering degree or anything like that, but it gives some really interesting insights into life in F1 and a job in Formula One. And it's just generally a good read. So I'd recommend that one.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Borhard said about Millikan and Millikan, because it's one that I have, but I've got it next to me, and it is an absolute wedge of a book. So what often people will read the book and they'll say, oh, I've been recommended this book, let's read it cover to cover, and then I'll be equipped to be, you know, the next race engineer of the future or the next Adrian Newey, or if I read that book, I'm going to be able to do it. If you try and read the whole book, you're going to spend your whole degree reading it because it is massive. What it's great for is if you're say you're watching F1 or you've got a certain engineering problem at university, if you're on the Formula student team, it is a really good reference book to understand like different aspects of race car engineering. So even though I'm not involved in it anymore, often there'll be a comment during the race weekend of, you know, we're struggling with balance or we're struggling with tire pressures. And then it's like, okay, make a note of that and then go and look at it. And then as Tom mentioned earlier about the industrial placement, like, it's a great opportunity to learn. When you're on placement, if you're able to have some of that kind of conversation with more experienced engineers, which is something that I still do now, like I'll go and ask somebody in vehicle dynamics or race engineering, like, oh, what the driver said this. And I looked at it in Millikan and Millikan, and then am I correct in understanding this? So it is a really good reference book. But moving away from kind of the engineering books and textbooks that people might recommend, I think there's a lot of books out there for race strategy side of things, a lot of books out there that help you develop core skill sets for thinking in the right way, which are useful for any job, not just race strategy. So the one that I recommend the most is Thinking Fast and Slow, which is about how you have a biological response to think fast. So same way that if you're getting chased by a lion, your instinct is to run, but then your system 2, which is your slow thinking, kicks in and says, actually, I don't need to run by this line and run away from the lion that's running at me because there's a big glass screen in the way, it can't get me. So it's kind of overruling your instinct with your kind of intelligent thought processes. The other one that I think is very good, and it's one that we've used in our group specifically, is called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. And that's a book about basically a lot of people will make a decision and then the outcome will be bad. So one example is that there's a company that's struggling, they hire a new CEO, and then the company goes under, and people look back and say, oh, we hired the wrong CEO. But actually you need to judge your decisions on how you make them at the time. So it's kind of a way of breaking down decisions into decision, execution, and outcome. So did I make the right decision? Did I make it in the right way? And what was the outcome? And effectively the outcome never really matters in terms of making the right decision. It's just basically look at that point. But yeah, just basically read around the subject as much as you can, not necessarily just focus on the engineering textbooks.
Thank you all. Our next question is, do you have any advice for a 15-year-old who hates maths but wants to go into engineering?
I might jump on this one because I think that was me when I was 15. I really hated maths at school and at university. Even though at school I was quite good at it. I just kind of, it was one of those things that I was good at, but I didn't really have any interest in. I'd say try and stick with it and like appreciate that it is really useful in any job that you end up in. And if you really, really dislike maths, and if you have like a strong dislike for maths now, then I think engineering in Formula One is probably going to be a bit of a struggle. There may be other things in Formula One that you could do, Like there's lots of stuff in marketing, or potentially you could become more on the practical side and perhaps look to join an apprenticeship program or work your way towards being a mechanic or a technician. So I found myself very much practical, like focused. I wanted to spend my entire life playing around with cars, but I realized that the best opportunities for me were to do engineering. So I hate maths, but I use it day to day. So it's a case of using it on something that has like a tangible outcome. Like you'll go to university and you'll learn about differential equations and you'll be like, why the hell am I learning about this? But then when you realize that you can use them to solve some pretty complex problems that makes a race car go quickly around a track, you suddenly think, you know what, those differential equations are actually pretty cool. And I want to learn how to solve them so I can make my car go quicker than everyone else's. And same way with like the maths we use in strategy, like if we can develop a mathematical model that helps us predict when the best lap to pit is, and we gain a position out of it, then math is pretty cool. But when you're doing like, you know, what's the probability that I pick a King of Hearts out of a deck of 52, it's not as exciting. But just try and think about the end goal of what you're going to use the maths for.
I would like to echo what Oliver was saying about the operational aspect of Formula One. One can think that most of the jobs are in engineering, but that is not true. If you don't like maths and you prefer a more practical approach, there are lots of different positions that you can really like, and you can develop your career, starting with apprenticeship, for example, being, for example, a mechanic, or working into making the Formula One car itself, or you prefer more the marketing side. That's a great career, and that's a big department on itself, marketing, graphic design, and some other positions that one might not think, but they are super important to a Formula One team, the communications team, and everything like that. So it's something that I really want to emphasize so that you all have in mind, because there are great opportunities there too.
Brilliant. Thomas, anything more you wanted to add, or is that all good? No.
No, I think they've covered everything I would want to cover. So
Good. Right. This one is for everyone again. For your respective disciplines, what is the single most important thing to learn?
Oh, I'll start on this one since I haven't spoken yet. I would say in my role, it's probably being flexible and working with others. There's such a big requirement for collaboration in Formula One, because although you're working on your problem and you may be coming up with a solution that you think is absolutely amazing, you know, I've been in situations where you can spend a week working on a design and you think it is the absolute best thing in the world, and then you'll go to another department who you need to integrate it with, and they'll take one look at it. Can I say this about Aerodynamicists when there's one in the call? But I mean, in my role, I'd say that Aerodynamicists and my department, they're probably the biggest like team players in terms of who we have to work directly with. And there's a constant battle of, essentially, they want anything we design to go on the car for analyzing the airflow to be infinitely small and infinitely strong and just infinitely amazing, basically. So we try and achieve that. And the problem is then when you try and get it signed off to be on the car, you'll go to the analysis team and they'll say, well, you've made it ridiculously thin. That's not going to work. You can't run that. And you've just got to be so flexible in your approach and don't dismiss any ideas. You know, what seemed like a bad idea at the start of the project might actually turn around and be the solution you go with, simply because the goalposts are constantly moving, and what was achievable 2 months ago actually might become, or rather what wasn't acceptable 2 months ago might now become your ultimate goal, because you've gone through the design process and everyone's agreed that actually a compromise here is what's required. And it's just that never give up. If someone says to you that's not going to work, you can't just go, oh, okay, well, never mind, we won't analyze that then. That's like, that isn't okay. That's the last thing you should be doing. Even if it's 5 p.m. on a Friday and you've got to have your design released by the end of the day, someone comes to you and says you can't do that, like, you just got to stay until it's done. It's not okay to just give up. you've got to be resilient in your approach.
Anyone else, or is Tom covered it?
I think, yeah, the ideas that Tom has covered are very, very important. One has to bear in mind that this is a teamwork altogether. So yeah, what you do has to be integrated into the work of other people. You cannot design the best wing in the world unless it's made on the car. So you have to make everything realistic, be open for an iteration process. Maybe what you think is the best might not be the best for structural analysis or to be manufactured. So that is something important to bear in mind. And also something that really has to be in your mindset is how quick priorities change in Formula One. You could be working in something which is super important 1 week. You really want to develop this upgrade for this race, but then you arrive on Monday morning, you have a meeting with all your colleagues, and it's like, oh, that's not so important because we have found this in the race and it's better that you work on that thing. And you have to be very, very open for these things to happen, which is something that happens more often than one can think. And yeah, that's one of the advices that I would give. Yeah, get that mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, just in our group in strategy, I'd say the things that I try and do are listen to the adage that prior planning prevents poor performance. And I may have missed one of the P's out there. You want to plan as much as you can for as many eventualities, such that you can quickly switch between the scenarios that you're in. But on the opposite end of that spectrum, you've got the no plan survives contact with the enemy approach. So quite often we'll plan what we're going to do in the race, and then in the first lap we'll either gain 5 positions, lose 5 positions, or one car drops to the back and you've got to adapt. So I think planning ahead is always a really valuable skill and will save you time. So so many times it's useful for any role, but at the same time you need to be ready to adapt and not stick to those plans and have a core understanding of the basics of your role, such that when the proverbial hits the fan, you're able to deploy that understanding and adapt to the situation that's put in front of you. And that's quite a useful one for interview processes as well. Like if you go into an interview, you plan for the questions you think you might get, but you know pretty well that you're not going to get those questions. So you need to understand the answers you give at a core level. So you might be able to, if you think you're going to get asked, how does an F1 car aerodynamics work? Don't just recite the answer that you've read in a textbook. Truly understand the answer that you're going to give to that question, such that if they ask you a slightly different question, you've still got the knowledge behind it.
Thank you. I think we'll have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So one of them is, one of the panelists in the webinar last time said knowledge of MATLAB is really important. How often do you actually use it?
So I mentioned this. Knowledge of MATLAB is very important. First of all, as a language programming code, it's a good way when you are in uni to start getting your head around that, because maybe when you start working on an F1 team, you work in another program, but you already have some knowledge of how things work, and programs are not that dissimilar in between. But probably like different roles have more incidence of MATLAB than others. In my case, for example, as a design aerodynamicist, I don't use it that much. But for example, if I was working in performance, in aero performance, I would use it to develop my tools in correlation or in car performance. It really depends on which path you want to follow for instrumentation and everything, like to create new things that might not exist. That's really important.
Yeah, I'll just touch on that quickly. One thing that I did at university was stay away from MATLAB as much as possible. And I regret that decision immensely because I use it quite commonly in my role at the moment. And it's, avoiding the things you don't like doing is just going to lead to pain down the line when you have to use them. or you find yourself needed, like it would be best for me to use MATLAB, for example, but I only know how to use Excel. It's going to make the job 10 times longer. So on the back of that MATLAB advice, I would say try and avoiding things you don't like doing as early as possible.
Yeah, I would just add as well, although your specific role in Formula 1 may not require MATLAB knowledge, I think having an awareness of it, regardless of where you are in the business, is really useful. So for instance, I don't personally use it in my role. However, I'm dealing with people all the time who are using it. And just to have a bit of understanding, if they ask for a piece of data or something, to understand how you can be helpful to them, because you understand what they're trying to do with MATLAB, I think is really, really important. So I would highly recommend, if you can get exposure to it, get as much as you can.
Brilliant. I think we just have time for one more question. So this might have to be brief, but for everyone, can you explain more on the technical part of your interview, if possible?
I will say that I don't think anyone's probably going to tell you in great detail what the technical questions that they had at interview were, because I think that somewhat defeats the point of an interview if you know what questions you're going to get asked. But generally, the technical questions, regardless of what role you apply for, will probably start quite open. So you may have a question that's quite simple, and then basically the way the interview process works for most F1 roles, and I imagine most engineering roles in general, are the interviewer will keep pushing you and testing your knowledge until you no longer have the knowledge. Then you get into the phase of you can extrapolate the knowledge you have into an area that you're not sure of. And then you'll go past that phase where you just don't have any idea. And we often, I want to say it's never a pleasant experience to get someone to the point where they don't know the answer, but understanding how that person works when they don't know the answer is much more insightful than knowing that someone knows the answer to a question that chances are they may not get asked in their job when they're actually here. So the knowledge side of it and testing the limit of your knowledge is not to see how big your knowledge circle is. It's understanding how you operate when you're outside your circle of knowledge. So yeah, you'll be pushed to your limits and perhaps slightly beyond in an interview, but you will anywhere. So understanding how you perform outside your limits is quite important.
Yeah, I would echo what Ollie just said. For my interview, from a mechanical design point of view, I got so obviously from my CV, my interviewers were aware that I didn't have a background in Formula 1. However, my main technical question was, how would you design this system for a wind tunnel model? Which obviously I'd never done before, but it's to see how you'd react, what kind of resources you pull on mentally, where your knowledge pool leads you, how you approach the problem. Do you just sit there and go, oh, I've never done that before, I couldn't possibly do that? Or do you go, oh, well, I could possibly do this? You can't just give up. They want to see that resilience and your drive. And every time you think you've satisfied them with an answer, invariably they'll come back and they'll want more detail. So you said you designed the system like this. Well, on this particular part, what grade of steel would you use? Why would you use that? And they will keep running with it just to see how you react to the constant questions and the constant push on your knowledge. And yeah, if you're going to try and fake it through the interview, they will catch you out. You've got to have done your homework, know what you're talking about. You won't. I don't think anyone would walk in and know categorically they know the answer to a set question unless you're coming from another Formula 1 team doing that exact role and just so happen to work on those exact projects. So it's more to see how you react than do you know that exact answer to that question, but you've got to be ready for it. And yeah, you've got to show your mental side and how you deal with those questions.
Yeah, I completely agree with Holly and Tom. I think what the interviewer would want to know is would want to get to know you and know how you think and how, from a general topic, a general problem, you can get to a specific solution, because that's what you're gonna do when you work in Formula 1. You're gonna create something that doesn't exist, or you have to really get the best of a specific design or something, or solve a complex problem. and there's not gonna be someone to ask or some procedure that you follow and then you get to a solution. You have to have a critical thinking, and they want to see how you apply the knowledge that you've got into solving it, even if it's not the best solution, but it's the best solution that you can think about. And that's really, really what they want to see you achieving. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Right. I think we have run out of time. So it's been great to talk to you guys, and thank you so much to everyone who registered for the event and is attending today. Thank you for all your questions. They've been great. I hope we've covered a good range of topics. As Kenny has mentioned in the chat, we will try and answer as many as possible that haven't been answered on the Formula Careers support group, which Louise has put a link to in the chat. A massive thank you to McLaren Racing and to all of our panelists for joining us over the past 2 webinars. We really appreciate it, and we've loved collaborating with you guys on these events. A massive thank you to Borja, Thomas and Ollie for giving up your time today, and I think that is it. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been really good. Thank you for all the good questions.
Yeah, thank you everyone for connecting. It's been a pleasure to share some time with you all, and all the best in the future.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you, Rachel, for organizing.
Yeah, cheers guys for turning up. I just want to say that Amelia was very sorry she couldn't make it today, but I think she'd be quite impressed with the number of people that turned up and asked good questions as well as our answers. I think we did quite well there.
Yeah, thank you.